If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. Oh, I'm sorry, am I interrupting kickoff? Now, let's be honest, black people wildly oversample when it comes to watching sports, so I'm sure that a lot of you are tuning in for the big game. Well, anti-black racism is no game, and if it is, our team is losing. Now, before I go any further, I think our brother Tari and Rain already spoke on this last week. He's one of the new voices of black media that, along with Sister Lisa Cabrera and Your World and others who I've mentioned, are making sure that you're getting the whole picture. Grifting for the white right can be lucrative, but you can't make a career out of it, at least not in public office. Daniel Cameron broke numerous laws when he covered up the murder of Breonna Taylor, and his office lied and told the grand jury not to indict, and then he did everything he could to stop the grand jurors from talking because he didn't want his criminality exposed. But of course it was, because he's incompetent. Unfortunately, the only ones who can do anything about it would be a special prosecutor at the state level or the federal government, and Merrick Garland has already decided he doesn't want to punish the actual murderers. So what that means is that there's nothing coming out of America's legal system to punish this criminality. Daniel Cameron was willing to lie and break laws to cover up what he knew to be a murder of a citizen by racist thugs in the Louisville Police Department, a department so corrupt the local post office won't even cooperate with their investigations. I'm not making that up. It's true. That's why the Louisville PD lied on their affidavit when they falsely claimed that the local post office had said Breonna Taylor had suspicious packages being sent to her apartment. Well, Cameron was just so sure that the white right was going to reward his lies and criminality and his derailing of justice with higher office, the governor's mansion. Yeah, he was going to become governor over Breonna Taylor's dead body. Except it turned out that predictably white power has no permanent plans for any of its bootlicks. Yeah, he lied and broke laws, and when he ran for governor last year, a white Democrat beat him. All those racist Republicans who cheered Cameron on for covering up a murder, they stayed home on election day. He didn't gain himself any support. He simply delighted the racists, at least for a few news cycles, and then they moved on to the next act of performative extremism. And I told you last year Cameron was done with politics. His career is over. Oh yeah, that idiot tries to claim to the white media that he may run for office again. Well, maybe he can get some low-level mayor's office somewhere, but he wants to win statewide office. He wants to climb the political ladder. Well, the GOP doesn't want him to have Mitch McConnell's seat. So he's been reduced to prostituting himself to some right-wing organization, as I told you he would do. Cameron's simply too stupid to try to sell himself to a think tank, and he's not charismatic or well-liked enough that he could be a lobbyist. So instead, he washes up at some pathetic conservative front group. In his case, this group calls itself the 1792 Exchange. Yeah, this is another one of those white right-wing nut groups who are still triggered and deranged over the massive success of the 1619 Project. Now, the 1792 Exchange says that their mission is to go after corporations and businesses who engage in woke capitalism. In other words, you got this gang of right-wing busybodies who are thinking to themselves that they're going to be getting money for themselves by claiming that they're criticizing or taking on wokeness in corporate America. And by the way, if this sounds just like Ed Blum and his asinine nuisance suits that he files against black businesses, you're right. Because these operations are all being funded by the exact same handful of wealthy white conservative zealots. The 1792 Exchange is funded by, among others, the so-called Servants Foundation, which is bankrolled in large part by David Green, the ultra-right-wing billionaire who owns Hobby Lobby. Ed Blum also has a bunch of very wealthy donors, among which a group calling itself Donors Trust. Basically, they're a clumsy front for a collective right-wing donor organization who floats money to groups that they don't want to be directly associated with. The way that it works is you go ahead and give money to Donors Trust, you claim that I'm a right-winger, I'm just giving money to this group who says that they support right-wing causes, and Donors Trust, in turn, takes that money and gives it to other organizations, like Servants Foundation or something, and they make sure that those guys get the money. By the way, the reason the Donors Trust is so popular with these wealthy right-wing zealots is because as a so-called donors advised fund, they're not legally obligated to actually reveal who the donors are. You get to give money to these guys behind a veil of anonymity. Billionaires get to put hundreds of millions of dollars into subverting the courts and undermining the society, and they also get to hide their hands because nobody knows who they are. They lie and claim that the people who give money to these groups like Donors Trust, they're just making donations. No, they know exactly where the money's going, and they can actually control where the money goes after it gets handed off. So that's why I call it a clumsy front. They try to pretend as if, there's separation between us, don't you know? We're not really sure where the money goes. No, it gives them a paper-thin veil of separation, just rhetorically, between themselves and whatever racist propaganda group that they want the money to go to. And Servants Foundation is the same thing. None of these groups is grassroots. They're all AstroTurf, conceived of and paid for by the same handful of white right-wingers who want to use their money to force their vile racism on the society. And since the voters have rejected them at the polls, they're going to what they know is their last ditch, the rigged federal courts. That's what this is about. This is their entire game plan because it's all they've got left. So this is where Daniel Cameron's at these days, and I hope you understand why I've spent years saying that these judges have to be punished. The white right thinks that this is their last ditch, but if they're not careful, it's going to wind up being their political grave. Now, the white right always says the government should stay out of the private sector. Let the market decide, they say. If a business's policies are bad, then people will naturally abandon it, and the market will get rid of the problem. But that's not what they're doing here. They're saying, we need to be able to say what the market should do. And they don't even stop there. In Florida, Ron DeSantis said the government is supposed to be telling businesses what to do. And we see these dark money funded groups and operatives like Ed Blum doing the exact same thing. So when they say let the market decide, what they really mean is the market should do what they say. Now, due to how the algorithms on these social media platforms work, they're always giving tons of free publicity to these sawed-off right-wing nuts. So as a result, I'm sure you might have heard of phrases like ESG or DEI. Well, I've told you about this in the past. The white right has been trying to figure out what's the next critical race theory. These guys have such linear, brain-dead thought processes, if they can be called that. They don't have but one play in the playbook. So when they found something that, at least at the local level in Florida, seemed to work in a few select counties, they decided, well, let's just go ahead and run that play again, over and over again. Hey, we had this critical race theory thing that we reduced to a 3-letter acronym, CRT. Well, we thought that we were going to win on that, but it was more sizzle than steak. Let's move on to something else. Let's find ourselves some other thing that's CRT related. So they started looking around and said, hey, here's some people here talking about diversity. We're going to attack DEI. Hey, there's something else, ESG. It's the exact same thing. CRT, ESG, DEI, ABC. This is what these guys come up with because they don't have anything else to run on. They don't have any sort of new ideas. So they do the same thing, only more of it. And why are they attacking corporate America? Well, because simply put, you had a few people, mostly from the LGBT sector, who are in these corporations. And some of them give passing lip service to diversity. What they're really talking about is diversity of sexual lifestyles. But for the white right, that's enough for them to think, now we got our next hobby horse. For the longest time, the conservatives like to say that corporate America should be allowed to decide everything because they thought, and at least for a while, they had corporate America completely and thoroughly on lock. There's been a few cracks in that facade due to people from alternative lifestyles. And that's what the real bickering and complaining from these white right-wing nuts happens to be about, from that thing. Not when it comes to black people. Black people have made no significant inroads with corporate America, not in the sense that you and I would think of, where you got some black folks in there who are actually fighting for actual black empowerment. But for the white right, just the very idea that what they thought of as being their private preserve, the corporations, the private sector that they claim to worship so much, now that they're hearing just a few small murmurs that sound like it's not going along with their sheet of music, now these guys are on full alert. Now understand something. Whether it be a corporation like Disney or whomever, all these guys want is as much money as possible. They pretend to be for everybody, but it's all branding and marketing for them. But even for the white right, that's too much. You see, the white right understands they lost the culture 50 years ago, and while they had a numerical majority population-wise, that too is beginning to come to an end. So what can they do to extend their white control a little while longer? This is where the courts come in. Federal judgeships are lifetime appointments, so once someone's on the bench, they can only be removed by an act of Congress. But judges in general and federal judges in specific are almost never removed. I told you the other day about that racist judge in Tennessee who illegally jailed black minors, and she literally made up a phony law that didn't even exist in order to give herself a rhetorical rationale for it. Now, what punishment has she been made to suffer as a result of this? None. These reprobates in robes have to be stripped of their law licenses. They have to also be made to serve prison time. They have to be destroyed when they do things like this. But the courts are where the powerful get things passed into law without having to suffer consequences at the ballot box. It's their end run around the voters. And that's the reason why both the white left and the white right rely on the courts. This is what they do. When it comes to black people, you'll find that the similarities between the white left and white right far outweigh any alleged differences. For example, Biden sent his Solicitor General to the Supreme Court to support the eroding of Miranda rights protections. Biden went out of his way to have his administration interject itself into what had been a local case of police corruption. And why would he do that? Because the white left understands their so-called opposition to the white right is only rhetorical. It's just their branding, but it's not their beliefs. There's a reason why Mitch McConnell went ham and made the GOP's top priority to front-load as many federal judgeships with right-wing extremists from the Federalist Society as he could. If you don't know who the Federalist Society is, you can find out all about them on this channel. Just put Federalist Society into the search results on my videos, and you'll get the rundown. A lot of Republicans left northern states like Michigan so they could go wallow in Ron DeSantis' Florida, and the result is they've weakened their own national influence. They're inadvertently turning themselves into a regional party. As the GOP begins to lose state legislatures, this will inevitably turn into their being a permanent political minority. They'll have the Deep South and a few hoots and hollers out in the Northwest, but elsewhere they'll be a minority, or in some places, gone altogether. Antonin Scalia himself, in that infamous Shelby v. Holder ruling, which was actually just a rubber stamping, he said the politicians were terrified to vote against affirmative action because the voters would vote them out of office. Gee, I thought that's what you call democracy. Well, Scalia said that the Supreme Court needed to go ahead and strike down parts of the Voting Rights Act because it was the right thing to do. He had no legal or constitutional basis for it. He just said, this is what we want, so we're doing it. That's what the Federalist Society is. That's the reason why it was important to have their members and gang on these federal benches so that they could just legislate from the bench blatantly. There's a constitutional name for that kind of behavior on the part of Scalia and his cohorts. It's called political high-handedness, and Supreme Court justices can be removed from the bench for it. Now, if the Democrats were serious about trying to bring sanity back to the Supreme Court, that's what they would be running on. They would be saying the first order of business is we're going to start impeaching those Supreme Court justices. Anyone who had anything to do with Shelby v. Holder, they're going to be called to account. They better be able to explain, and it better be rock solid, their constitutional basis for it. If it's just, well, we don't like it, that's not good enough. Have them impeached, have them removed. But they're not going to do that. You see, Republicans know that their gerrymandered voting district maps aren't going to be able to maintain their artificial majority in these state legislatures for much longer. So it's inevitable that laws that they don't like are going to start getting passed nationwide, and they won't be able to stop it. They want a way to ensure that they could do an end run around these legislative changes, and that's where the white right's judicial takeover strategy comes in. Now, nothing happens in a vacuum under white supremacy. So when Mitch McConnell was targeting federal judgeships and hoping that this would extend their white political control a little bit longer, you also see that wealthy white conservative ideologues were putting big money behind their own racist operations in the private sector. This is where the Manhattan Institute and Christopher Rufo come in, as well as the arch-racist provocateur Ed Blum. I gave you the rundown on his 30-year war against black people on this channel too. He files nuisance suits at the drop of a hat for decades, and you got wealthy white conservatives who bankroll his little pathetic campaigns. And these Federalist Society operatives on the bench rubber stamp Blum's lawsuits, because for the first 15 to 20 years he wasn't getting any traction at all. They ignored the law because the Federalist Society isn't about law, it's about ideology. This is why they were so stupid as to strike down Roe v. Wade without taking into account that the culture has changed. So when you kick this issue back to the states, you would begin facing statewide ballot initiatives. And those same white Republican women who voted for Trump, well, they would make an exception so they could be able to get rid of any inconvenient pregnancy. Neither the Federalist Society nor the Republican Party ever considered that possibility. Because when you spend all your life sitting around Harlan Crow's mansion and your nights kissing his behind, you think that the only people who matter are the politicians. and the white right has them on lock, at least in the red states. This is how you get utter morons like Chris Rufo saying that his asinine anti-black crusade in Florida would be a national blueprint for how to fight woke. He couldn't even make it a statewide blueprint in Florida. Moms for Liberty took over a county school board in Florida and then immediately got voted out in the very next election. Some blueprint. But this is the white right-wing grift. Rufo's making grandiose claims that he can't sustain, all as a form of self-promotion. This is how this guy intends to make money for himself. This is how these parasites live. His would-be patron Ron DeSantis has now signed his own political death warrant. He'll be out of office with nowhere to turn. So, like Rick Snyder before him, when DeSantis' term ends as governor, he's going to return to the pathetic obscurity from which he slithered. There's no Senate seat in his future because Rubio and the former governor what's-his-name have those positions. DeSantis used to be in the House of Representatives. Maybe he'll try to get his old seat back. But it's unheard of for a governor to seek a lower position on the political totem pole. You can move laterally from the governor's mansion to the Senate, like Mitt Romney did, or vice versa. But nobody moves from the governor's mansion down to the House unless they're just desperate. Which is entirely possible with DeSantis. He has very few options, if any at all. And what's Rufo going to do when his only benefactor is no longer there and no longer able to just hand him a patronage job on a university's board of trustees? When DeSantis isn't there to just let him stand behind him for photo ops like a prop that he is, what's he going to do then? He'll go looking to see if there's any other plumb, dumb right-wing nut who's just stupid enough to put him on the payroll because they don't actually look to see if this guy produces anything. See, with the white right, substance is always trumped by symbolism. All you actually have to do is get yourself on Sean Hannity or Laura Ingram's show and just go ahead and say that you're owning the libs, and there's always going to be some idiot with more money or more campaign donations, I should say, than brains, and they'll go ahead and give you a patronage job. This is what Rufo's counting on. And when you look at how stupid the GOP leadership is, you understand that he might be onto something. Now, this isn't to say that the DeSantises and the rest of these idiots can't do a lot of harm to people between now and when they inevitably collapse, but it is to say that their failure is as predictable as the rising of the sun. The white right has to do this because they don't have a plan B. They branded themselves as the white man's party, but when you do that, demographics become destiny. And for them, that was a death sentence. So this is their idea now. Use the courts as their last ditch. And this will only last as long as they have some corrupt Federalist Society judges on the bench who they can run to. Now, if the Democrats were a real political opposition party and not just a DC-based social club, they would make their top priority retaking those federal judgeships, challenging the judges who are on the bench, removing them, play hardball. But the problem is the Democrats already know everything I've told you, and they have no interest in stopping these white right-wing nut groups, at least not as far as black people are concerned. To the Democrats, this is all part of their perpetual policy of manipulating us. That's how the Democrats and Republicans play off of each other. If you look at all the legislation that the white left loves to brag about that they did, most of the time it came from black people. And it was changes that we forced them to do. The Democrats didn't want to do any of the stuff that we had them do. The Democrats opposed all the civil rights legislation. In fact, they proposed practically all of the legislation that has changed America for the better. It wasn't until black activists turned public sentiment against them that they pretended to get on board. But they never liked it. They always resented it. Now, while the Democrat leadership did accept the fact that the culture had changed, you see that the Democrats in general didn't change at all. This is how you get a Joe Biden, a northerner from Pennsylvania who was mentored by segregationists and who is every bit as racist as they are. Keep in mind, as the Cajun skeletor James Carville said, Pennsylvania is Philadelphia in the east, Pittsburgh in the west, and Alabama in between. That's how you get a Joe Biden. The Republicans actually reflect and promote the true agenda of the government, both sides of it. And the Democrats' job is to be phony opposition who gets you to sit on your hands while they allow those policies to continue. And in many cases, when the Democrats are in power, they themselves propose and pass anti-black legislation specifically meant to target us, from Biden's 94 crime bill to Bloomberg's stop and frisk policy to Kamala Harris denying citizens their constitutional rights when she was DA and even a state attorney general of California. The left and right are the left and right hands of white supremacy. So when you see Democrats not doing anything about these right-wing operations, it's because they agree with them. Negro Jim Clyburn's daughter was on the FCC, and when she had to leave, she now works for the same communications cartels that she was allegedly regulating. See, she couldn't make the jump to politics like she wanted to, though we all know that she's hoping to inherit her father's congressional seat when he dies, retires, or returns to his vampire's crypt. Both of the major parties are operating out of the same political playbook, running the same type of political grift. Sure, what the white right's doing is a more odious, more obnoxious version, but both of them are pretty much doing the same thing. We, however, cannot let any of this slide. Understand something. We have no friends. Not with the Democrats, nor with the Republicans. They always seem to make sure that their little operatives wash up somewhere and give them something to do. For Daniel Cameron, though, this is pretty much the end of the line. There's nothing that comes after this because, truth be told, all of his good buddies on the white right, they were sick and tired of looking at him from day one. Just like with Clarence Thomas, they prefer that he be in the background. They don't mind reading about his anti-black antics, but they still don't like seeing him. So I suspect before it's all over, Daniel Cameron's going to wind up getting tossed out of this job eventually, and then he'll call himself doing some political consulting. Though if anybody decides that they want to give him money for advice, you might want to consider the source. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Burkett Cochrane, Charlie, Rahman Muhammad, Jacques Hargett, and Roxanne Allen. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.